On there Wednesday. Let's talk about some MBA stuff. Make sure you sign up if you haven't already. We do events like this all the time, give out free resources. You can join the community, just stay up to date on everything MBA and all the other goals you have in your life. So very excited. We have a packed full agenda. We're going to jump right in. And yeah, just excited to be here with all you. We're going to cover a lot of ground tonight. So we're going to rip through application strategy, resume, letters of rec, essays. We'll also be sending a follow-up email with links to all these coach profiles, access to a bunch of free resources like recommender prep docs, sample essays, etc. Want to just make sure we get everyone off to the races as best as possible. And yeah, just make sure you sign up so you get access to all that stuff. Just quick overview. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We try to manage the questions in the chat and that I'll be asking the panelists. Panelists will be kind of multitasking here. Be respectful and supportive, of course. And yeah, we'll have a great night tonight. We'll start with some introductions. I'll just kind of quickly explain what Leland is. We'll spend most of the time on the MBA expert panel, but we'll do just kind of a high level on what to expect with MBA applications, and then we'll wrap up at the hour. So just by way of introduction, my name's John Colliker. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Leland, recent Stanford GSB grad. So I've been through this process. I've coached a lot of people through it myself. I'll be moderating the panel. You'll also see Erica, Amelia, and Andrew in the chat. Erica has put a lot of work into this, so we're really excited and grateful to her for throwing this all together and excited to jump in. Also want to introduce our amazing panel. Actually, I'll kick it over to them to introduce themselves. Very excited. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We have lots of different school representations, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. So we can all debate which the best school is out there. But all three are undoubtedly amazing. Ariel, I'll kick it to you to start, and then we'll go to Ben and then Allie.
Sounds good. Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Anderson. Nice to meet you all and great to see you all here for this panel. I am a recent 2022 HBS grad, and I live in the Bay Area right now. My background's in healthcare, and I work as an associate director of strategy at Teladoc Health right now. And I've been doing admissions consulting for 3 years now, and really excited to see one of my clients here on the call. So shout out to Sebastian. And I will pass it over to Ben.
That was wonderful. Hey, everybody. Great to meet you all. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Queens, New York. I'm now back living here after going to Stanford for MBA. But really excited to chat with everybody. I've gotten to I feel very fortunate to have gotten to do a bunch of different things, from working in politics for Mayor Emanuel in Chicago to some time at McKinsey, and now I'm running my own company I just started. Recently, though, I feel like I've gotten to see some awesome full circle moments coaching wise, where a lot of my clients who have gotten into places like Stanford, Harvard, et cetera, I've gotten to meet them in person, hang out, like just kind of chat with them, and it's been a really nice year and a half.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Allie. Very excited to be here with Ariel and Ben. I am a Wharton grad. I also did a dual degree with the Kennedy School. My background's largely in finance, spent 4 years at Goldman, and then did a bunch of other stuff in the endowment and venture capital space. I currently work as a private equity associate focused on affordable housing. So lots of experience in impact investing. I've also dabbled in consulting, and so can spend a lot of time helping folks with those backgrounds, craft stories, and career transitions as well. Have about 4 years of coaching experience. It's really cool to see the first class of folks I've coached graduate from programs like the GSB and Wharton and Harvard as well. And just really excited to get to know you guys and see how we can be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you for those introductions. We have hundreds of amazing coaches and hand selected these three. So very excited to get their perspectives tonight. We also love to hear from you. Where are you dialing in from in the world? It's always fun to see all the diversity of backgrounds and locations. Where are you working / studying? And then what's your dream MBA program? Let's start some controversy early on. Feel free to throw it in the chat. We got one vote for Wharton. We can't read the name, so We got London, San Francisco. At Amazon, Newport Beach, Pleasanton, a lot of California representation. Chicago. It's great. We got a lot of California. Got some Utah, Boston. Okay, there it is. Australia, I think, wins furthest away so far. That's
Who's
great.
from Queens? I saw somebody from Queens. That's awesome. Hold on. That's great.
That's great. Cool. Thanks for being here, everyone. It's fun to, I know some of you are dialing in the middle of the night, so it's great. We will also send out this recording, but stay tuned live because it'll be great. But we'll send that out. So just as a quick introduction, Leland, we're a marketplace where you can access coaches like these amazing people. We have hundreds of coaches and tens of thousands of people in our communities. We've helped tens of thousands of people apply to these top schools. Our coaches are frankly the best coaches in the world from all over, from all these different schools, different programs, and they've helped so many people like yourselves apply to these programs. So we do a bunch of free events. And then if you want to work with these coaches one-on-one, you can reach out to them directly through their Leland profiles, set up a free time to chat and get to know them and see if it'd be a good fit to work together. Definitely encourage you to do that. We'll drop those profiles in the chat throughout the session. We've also raised $5 million from top venture capital firms and have representation from all sorts of different backgrounds and companies. So try to have coverage to help match you with the best person for your budget, background, and goals. We have a few different offerings. So the first is one-on-one coaching, as I've mentioned. We also have group classes. Several of these coaches have offered group classes on a variety of different topics. And then we also create content and community in a free fashion and try to share these templates and guides with you to just help you get started. So try to meet you with wherever you're at in the process and make sure that we have something that fits your budget. How it works honestly very much like Airbnb, and many of you that have already signed up have seen this, where you tell us your goal, what you're trying to do. You can browse coaches and classes that fit that budget, background, and goals, and then you can book directly with a coach. So that's and then you can start working together. So that's how that works. A good example of how this works for real, Victor, who actually worked with one of our coaches, Drake, is wrapping up his first year at the GSB. It's always fun. I think these coaches mentioned meeting some of the people that they've helped in real life is always a full circle moment and really exciting. So just as kind of an example. All right, so let's jump into the meat here and just kind of level set with the MBA application is very intensive. They're coming at, you guys are all coming at this after a few years of work experience, if not a deferred applicant. So there's a lot of pieces to your story and a lot of pillars that you have to kind of highlight to the admissions committee. So it's hard to know where to start. You have the GMAT and GRE, application strategy, letters of rec, extracurriculars, awards and honors, resume, essays, interviews, and all the hustle that goes into just preparing and getting the information and learning about the process. So we're gonna spend some time here just talking to these coaches and getting their perspective. Timeline looks different for everyone. This is certainly not like the perfect timeline. It largely depends on how many schools you're applying to and where you're at in the process. But because round one isn't for a few months, right now you should be kind of deciding on the schools you want to apply to, starting to think through recommenders, starting to craft essay or think about essay narrative, probably not putting pen to paper just yet. Make sure you're finding your coach. The best coaches book up quickly. So make sure you're starting to have those conversations. And then, you can start to, as you get, the next few months, you can start craft these narratives, polish the resume, getting everything else ready to go. And you'll hear from different coaches, they have different approaches. Some coaches like to start with the resume. Others like to start with recommenders. Others like to do essays. So it largely depends on you, and you can work on this timeline with your coach. One thing I'll mention, these coaches have all generously offered to discount their full application packages, $100 off if you book in the next week. That gives you time to reach out to them. And I think Erica just dropped their profiles in the chat. So if you're interested in working with them in a comprehensive way, I know a lot of these coaches have already started to sell these packages, but they'll give everyone $100 off if you're attending this session. Just need to book, and you can use that discount code Leland-MBA event-100 off. We'll send that in the email as well. So make sure you reach out to them, see who would be the best fit, and you can listen tonight and see their styles. So I encourage you to do that. All right, let's jump into the expert panel. To kick things off, I'm curious, what's your best tip for applying to a top 10 program? And maybe we'll go reverse order this time and start with you, Allie.
Sure. Best tip, multifold, so it's hard to pick one, but I think starting early is really key. So the fact that you're all on this panel thinking about your long-term strategy is really helpful. I also think that because you have the time, reflecting on who you authentically are and how you want to show up to an admissions committee takes a lot of different methodologies. You can do free writes. You can also take time to interview your friends and family and ask them what they think you should do professionally or what personal anecdotes and stories highlight your personality to them. So time and just talking to a lot of people.
Great. Ben and then Ariel.
Well, starting early is my number one, so I'll choose my second tip. Honestly, I think don't underestimate any element of the application process. None of this stuff is necessarily the hardest Rubik's Cube you'll ever have to solve, but I think the thing that's critical to remember is that this stuff just takes time and some reps and some volume. You have to put some real effort into this, especially with essay writing. I find that those folks who do start early, but really once they get going, they build a lot of momentum. Amazingly, almost no essay that I see the beginning of looks that similar at the end. Themes get revised. Basically, everything changes at least once over. So that would be my big piece of advice.
Yeah, that's great. Ariel?
Allie and Ben stole two really great pieces of advice. I think I would add to that by just saying, I think you all are already starting to take what I'm going to say, like by being here, but I think just talking to people, getting perspectives on different schools is so important, especially when it comes to those like, why do you want to attend this school, especially like during interviews or essays? And I think, knowing what school is going to fit with your brand and with your story and help you achieve your goals. It's more than just looking at rankings. You have to really understand like the culture, the teaching style, the types of students that you're going to be going to those schools with, so that you'll end up actually being happy.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I know that's a tough question to kick things off because it's pretty general, but that was helpful. I think one of the things we hear a lot about is like, hey, I already have a great recruiting resume. Do I have to like do anything different? What are some of the primary differences that you see? And yeah, we don't have to get everyone's take, but I'd be curious, maybe Ariel, to get your thoughts. What are some of the primary differences you see between MBA resumes and recruiting resumes?
Yeah, I think for when you're doing job recruiting, you're going to really be tailoring your resume to that specific role. So you may, take out some job experiences that are meaningful to you, but not necessarily tailored to that particular job. So I think your resume for your MBA will probably be a little bit more comprehensive. It's also going to be focused on the so what, like you're not necessarily like describing your job as much as you want to like demonstrate impact, the like why you're putting, like why does this bullet point matter on your resume? I think there's like the third thing I will say, the third and last thing is that there's also typically some space to share a little bit more about who you are. Of course, in the actual MBA portal, there will be an opportunity to share about extracurriculars and interests, but I think it's also useful at the bottom of your resume, to add a little bit more about like who you are as a person, not who you are as a professional, but like what do you enjoy to do, like to show that you are a full person.
Yeah, that's great. Allie, Ben, anything else you'd add on that?
Just want to jump in quickly with like a common footfall that I see on recruiting resumes versus MBA resumes. Get rid of all of your acronyms. Like the adcoms probably know generally what you do unless you're doing something super cool and bespoke and startup-y. But the number one thing I have to do is go like line by line and strip out any acronym. So technical jargon in general, just try to get rid of and have it like at an 8th grade reading level. I think leadership experience is really critical to highlight too, in a progression from like an analyst to an associate level. And the last thing that I'll say is if you're a career switcher or someone who's trying to use the MBA to make a pivot, and that's the narrative you want to highlight, any green shoots of like efforts that you've started to do. So let's say I'm in finance, but I want to be a PM. maybe one of the projects I've worked on, or maybe one of my deals is for a tech company. So I'd want to call that out as like relevant experience to just try to like help shape that narrative for the adcom.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anything else you'd add, Ben? Yeah, that's great. I think maybe one thing, one screen that we often hear is, why would the CEO of your company care about this particular bullet? And I think that's an important lens to take, because oftentimes the adcom isn't going to be in the weeds on this like technical engineering project or this like, financial transaction that might actually be relevant to a hiring manager or recruiter. What they want to see is, can this person level up their experience to see the broader picture? So that's perhaps one thing. And maybe the other thing I would add is, these are schools, and so they often care a little bit more about what experience you had while you were in school as an undergrad, and were you involved in clubs? What did you do to contribute to the campus? They want to know that you're going to show up and contribute. So just a couple additional things that came to mind. Let's shift gears to recommendations. Probably the most stressful part for me, because it's the only part I couldn't control fully, and maybe that's just like being a control freak that comes out. But Ben, how do you get maybe just where do you start with recommendations? How do they fit into the broader application? And then we can get into how to actually execute on them.
Yeah. From a strategic angle, I think they serve it two like principal functions at a high level. But the first is they lend credibility to the stuff that you put in your application. If you say something, that's great and all, but if you have yourself and you have a seasoned professional talking about the same thing and they offer different lenses, that adds a lot. And if you're generally in line, it can be, I just think it's such an important part of the application that's not talked about nearly as much as the essays or the GMAT, just because one's a test and one's a thing we've all written 1,000 times. I think the second is to speak a lot more about your character and who you are, and what makes you truly exceptional in some ways beyond just the pale of the paper. Those two things to me are the ones that are the main things that make recommenders just so important. And I think their value is only going to grow over time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, especially in a world of people trying to use your favorite tool, ChatGPT, to try to tackle essays. I think the perspective that others have on you is going to be especially important. It's interesting. Ariel, anything you'd add on this?
I would just say, yeah, I don't know if we're getting to this in the next question, but I think, when you're thinking about like who to recommend, who's going to recommend you, like making sure that it's someone who really knows your work and is not just like some senior level, executive level person in the org that's just going to, the title looks flashy potentially. So just making sure that they really understand your work, so that they can actually truly speak to it. And yeah, I agree with Ben, like someone else hyping you up is going to reflect really well than you just like bragging on yourself in your application.
Yeah, maybe Allie, to build on that, what are some of the criteria you think about in selecting recommenders? I think this is a pretty, I think stressful time. There's a lot of options. Sometimes there's not that many options, but like, yeah, what are the criteria?
Yeah, I think Ariel and Ben made great points. The general rule of thumb is the senior person who knows you the best and can speak to your work product. And let's say you're in a very hierarchical organization, or let's say perhaps you're only 1 or 2 years out of school and you haven't had that many reps with that many people. It's really important to get someone who not only knows your excellent work product, but also sees you function and do things outside of what is designated in your job description. Initiative, leadership, those are qualities that adcoms look for and are really highlighted through anecdotes and stories. So if you had like one intensive shorter project with someone where you really went above and beyond versus a manager who's known you for a year, but you kind of haven't really outperformed, I think when recommenders look at you and even the phrasing of the questions that are asked are oftentimes, how does this candidate compare to other people in the cohort? So really thinking through, where have you distinguished yourself, and how senior is that title is a factor of consideration.
Yeah, that's great. One question I'll kind of flip to all of you. If I'm deciding between, 3 or 4 people and trying to get a sense for who the right person would be, what should I do? What's like the right way to go about this without like yanking the rug out from someone after you've already asked them? Like, how do you navigate these more sensitive conversations? Any tips?
I think directness goes a long way. Like just like I think the right attitude is, and you should only be going to these types of people to whom you feel this way anyway. But
Yeah.
this kind of sense of gratitude, I think, is critical in these conversations. You are asking them for a significant fraction of time, and you're also asking them to put your name, like their own name and association with yours, which is a risk, right? They don't need to take any risk. They're going out on a limb to do this for you. So I think that being very open with them and being like, hey, like, I would really be honored if you write my letter of recommendation. Like, these are the reasons that I've thought about why I think you'd make a phenomenal recommender, but also why I think you'd be the type of person to like actually guide me to this next step in my career. Those types of things I think hit much better than like a long-winded email that somehow buries the lead and like says, hey, would you actually do all this stuff for me? Like, in person if you can, or just like over Zoom, at least FaceTime, like make it a real conversation.
Yeah, it reminds me, or Ariel, were you going to say something about that?
Oh, I was also just going to mention, if you're choosing between, 4 different people who could be your recommender, or I guess one of your recommenders, I would also rather you pick someone who is going to write the recommendation themselves rather than ask you to write the recommendation. That's just like kind of best practice. You cannot write in a different voice other than your own voice unless you're a very skilled communicator and writer. And so I think I would also use that as a criteria as well. Does the person have the time to actually commit to writing the recommendation?
Yeah, it's a great call out. One of the things, what I was getting at, it reminds me when I was deciding between who I was going to pick for my recommenders, and I thought this one guy was going to be perfect. And I took him to lunch and I said, hey, I'm applying to business school. I'm trying to learn more about what the requirements are for recommenders, but I just wanted to see if you'd be open to it. And that was a really helpful question because it wasn't saying, hey, will you do this? It was, I think, to Ben, your point, just trying to be honest. Like, I still don't know. And he was like, oh, are you sure? I think I'd love to, I'd be happy to, but like, am I the best person? And I'm like, no, I am very sure now that you are not the best person. But it was like, yeah, let me just get back to you. I'll think about it. And then I got back to him and said, I found someone else. And that person ended up being a lot better fit. When I asked them the same question, they said, yes, let me write your recommendation. I will do a good job. It's not always that clear, but in that case it was. Okay. So Ariel started to hint at this, but let's talk about preparation for recommenders. Worst case scenario is you being forced to write, your own recommendation because of all sorts of reasons. Your voice, you're not going to be as nice about yourself. Ideally, so it's awkward to write as nice of things as the recommendation needs to say. Allie, what advice do you have for preparing recommenders to do a good job?
Yeah, I think this is where you talked about lack of control, and this is where I like to take control, but that might just be my personality. Yes. And so all of these coaches, us on the call and Leland more broadly, we're here to be like your hype men and women. So we are meant to like be a mirror basically and reflect back how awesome you are. So what I like to do is, and I start with that. So John was talking about how people sequence things differently. I like to start with recommenders in some ways because what I hope to produce with my clients is kind of a one-page, not a written recommendation, but a very targeted narrative that aligns with the themes that are going to appear in the essays and throughout the resume. So I like to work with people to identify like 2 to 3 values or traits that really come through and identify specific anecdotes and stories that bring those to life in the same way Ben and Ariel were speaking to. There is a formula. A lot of the schools got together and basically asked folks to answer the following questions. One is, what is the biggest piece of feedback you've ever received? And the other is, in comparison to peers, like what makes this candidate stand out? So starting to think you can answer those questions is really critical, and then culling that down into a nice, compact one-pager.
Yeah, that's great. Ben, anything you do differently or anything you'd add to that?
This is actually where Ali's number one tip of start early. Really important.
Yeah.
First, like give your recommenders like times, deadlines, quantity. Like give them the raw materials and make your entire job in this process is to make their job as easy as humanly possible. Without like, I think if you can avoid it, writing the recommendation yourself. Like barring that, like really simplify this. It will motivate them and you'll end up with a better letter for purely mood purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we'll send out a recommender prep template for you to just kind of have to get started. But this is where I definitely recommend working with a coach because they can kind of be that mirror and help kind of pull out those themes and make sure that it's very polished. I would absolutely not recommend just asking your recommender to write a recommendation. It doesn't show it doesn't help them, but it also doesn't show them how serious you're taking this process. And I think when you come with that one pager that Ali mentioned, or, anything really, and just say, hey, this is what I've worked on to help you. It shows them how serious you are. It shows them how much you care. And I think that matters a lot, especially in a situation where the schools are kind of trying to trick the recommender into being an evaluator. And that's not what they are. You're drafting them onto your team as a recommender. Great. So let's shift gears to essays. I think one of the more meaty topics that is impossible to cover in a quick call, but we can get started on it. There's all sorts of different essays. We tried to bucket them generally, but they're all sorts of, there's different flavors. I think that, the most common are the kind of personal statement-ish questions, like what matters most to you and why, what else do you want us to know, cover letters, that kind of thing. Trying to get at your story, who you are. The second is why this schools care a lot about yield. They care that people want to go to their schools and they're not just applying blanketly to everyone saying the exact same thing. So these are great ways to kind of differentiate yourself there. And then the last bucket is sort of the catch-all, like tell us about a time you had a positive impact. Tell us about the biggest commitment you've made, kind of random things that also force you to not just copy and paste things from other schools, but actually kind of answer a new question. So with that in mind, let's jump into essays. How do you recommend getting started? And let's start with you, Ariel. I'd love to hear, like, what do you recommend for people that are just getting going here and they're looking at a blank sheet of paper? Where do they get started?
Yeah, I actually think this is where I tend to work with clients differently and based on their styles. But I think first, the branding piece that we were mentioning earlier, that's where this is going to come into play really heavily, is like having some base story that you can kind of go back to that you're trying to convey throughout all parts of your application, including your essay. So that's going to become like a central theme for your essay. And then I feel like I have had clients that are a bit more like they want to outline, they want to talk through each story that's going to go into their essay. And then there are clients who are afraid to write anything. And for those clients, to be honest, I tell them, write everything, like just write so that I can get a better sense for your story, your anecdotes, and then we can go through, we can chop it up, we can, rearrange things. And once that really helped, for one of my clients, helped him get kind of past the writer's block. And we were able to create this really amazing story with his HBS essay in particular, since that one's so open-ended. But yeah, that's kind of how I approach it, is like really starting with the branding and then from there, like flexing to the style of the person that I'm working with.
Yeah, that's great. Ben, Ali, anything you'd add or things that you do that kind of help people get started?
Yeah, I'll go real quick. I feel like the last year I must have held that like essay session, like with, I think it was like 5 or 6 different classes. And then like, I don't even know, I feel like one-on-one, it's even more effective and more fun, honestly. But I personally take people through like this fully fledged like essay workshop where I think one of the best ways to get started with essays is honestly just to check out how a few other successful ones looked, diagnose them, and try to extrapolate techniques that you can use for your own. This is not to copy their essay. This is not to write the same paragraphs that they wrote in your own words. This is just so you can see some best practices and also build some confidence in realizing the fact that you don't have to have founded 6 companies by the time you were 12 and were a Forbes 15 under 15. Like you can just be like a regular person and write a great essay. And the topic and the content doesn't have to be anything spectacular, but it's the way that you've shown your growth. It's the way that you articulate and talk about your experiences that goes a long way. And so I think people with the most traditional, as they would put it, traditional cookie cutter backgrounds, all the way to people with the most eccentric stuff, all can write great core essays about something eccentric or something totally normal and everyday.
That's great. Anything else you'd add, Allie?
I think because you guys have the grace of time right now, not getting so beaten down that you need to focus on one story. I think like boiling the ocean a little bit and really working with a coach to kind of like get to the raw meatiness and not be afraid to be vulnerable, especially when you are working with someone live, to like go through all of the random anecdotes that you think may not be relevant, because we have a lot of pattern recognition over the course of working with like 30, 40 plus people. And we know what stories sound trite versus what are kind of authentic. And so it's okay to like write 3 or 4 drafts, and maybe it's only, you end up picking one. And to Ben's point earlier, the first draft will not look like the last draft. And again, that's why we're here. So just having the patience and flexibility to understand that like, it'll be a bumpy ride.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for those takes. Okay, I know we talked a little bit about this, so it might be some overlap, but maybe just to kind of combine these 2 questions here, personal statement and why this school essays. Many of you feel strongly about like how to approach one versus the other. I'll open it up to any of you to talk about this. Maybe I can share my perspective. I definitely always recommend starting with personal statement essays. I think the why this school essay is, it's one of the misconceptions here is that people will kind of turn it into a, let me tell Harvard, or Harvard doesn't ask this question. So let me tell Stanford why Stanford is awesome. And like, that's not really what they're asking for. They want to know about your aspirations and how Stanford is a good fit for those and what you're going to bring to Stanford. So I think there's, sometimes approaching the why the school essays, it also helps to talk to people who are at the school or to have kind of these personal anecdotes. But maybe I'll just open it up as you think about the different types of essays. How do you recommend approaching them? Do you have any sort of like model you follow?
I'll just start, I guess. I mean, I ask what I would call are a lot of like very high yield, important questions that can't help but reveal important things and shaping things about your life. What are the most formative things that have happened to you in the last 5 years? Who are the most important people you met? Like, all of these types of questions just facilitate good thinking that is productive and is a lot more core to who you are than if I were to just ask you your favorite color, your favorite sports team. So I think those high yield questions are great, and there are a number of sources on them to find your own. I think that's a great place to start. And then I also think just like staying consistently focused on the question. The first essay is, for Stanford at least, what matters most to you and why? Most of your essay should be about what matters to you and why it matters. And why GSB or why Harvard? That's really why that school. How does that fit into your life trajectory, and how does that build upon who you are?
Yeah, that's great. Allie?
I want to echo the idea of high yield questions. For me, it's more about values and what themes we can draw from those values, because often the anecdotes are really aligned with like who you are, and then your values ultimately motivate what your professional aspirations are. It often, not always, but that makes the transition from what is like your personal motivation, what are you most passionate about and why, to like, this is why I need an MBA. And so having that through line is really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Ariel, anything you'd add on this, or on the kind of the why the school is just from different types?
Yeah, I think just the why this school, this is where it's going to be really important to not just look at the website. And like, for instance, for NYU and Columbia, everyone's going to say, it's because it's in New York and that's cool. But like, how does that actually connect to you? And like, why does that matter? And I think it's only through talking to students, like, why does it being in New York matter? Is it opening up opportunities for you to intern during the school year? Like, why does that location matter? Or for GSB, why does it matter that it's in the Bay? So I think like the more that you talk to students and alums, you'll be able to understand like what are actually going to be the most valuable resources to, get me on the career trajectory that I'm trying to go on.
Yeah, I remember working. So one of the clients that I worked with this last year applied to 7 schools. This was, pretty heavy load of schools in one round because it was the deferred process. And by like the last one, he was basically just like swapping out essay, like, resources for it. And it just felt so inauthentic, and you can feel it. And these people, these admissions committee members, they've seen it all. They know when it's like a copy paste, right? They know when they read a Harvard essay and it's like, and it says, and this is what matters to me. And they're just like, okay, you could have at least dropped that sentence. So I think, make sure you're tailoring them. Every one of these schools wants to think that you are their number one, or they are your number one. And so this essay is obviously a great way to do that. And even in your personal statement, I think there's ways to make that connection. Okay, super helpful. One of the questions we always get is, how do I stand out? I feel just plain old me. What do I do to actually I don't necessarily have I've been working at McKinsey or I've been working at Goldman. Like, what are the things I can do to actually stand out amongst the, what is kind of feels like an overrepresented crowd? What advice do you have on this? Maybe Ariel, I'd love to get your thoughts first, and then we can go to Ali and Ben.
Yeah, I found, I guess because I've worked with a number of different applicants now, I've seen applicants that have the same goals, but they have a different motivation and they have a different why. And I think that's what's really going to set people apart when it's like, okay, yeah, I come from consulting, and everybody, like your second or, whatever, your third or fourth year of consulting is going to apply to business school. So I understand that, but I think like the motivation for what you're doing and the why behind like what your goals are is what's really going to set you apart. And I also think like some of these schools really care about who you are as like a full person. And so I think, what are the things that you care about outside of work? Like, what are you doing outside of work? What leadership experiences have you gained? I think those are also ways that you can stand out. But I think the main way is through thinking through and understanding like the why for what you do and how you've made decisions in your life.
Yeah, that's great. Ali, anything you'd add on that?
I think that's 100% spot on. The other thing to think through is what in terms of when you're presenting what you want to do after school, what is a differentiated view or tact that you might have on just a standard like private equity or consulting experience? And if you're so fortunate to be sponsored, like how are you going to use your time in an MBA to help further you once you get back to MBB or wherever you might be? And I think when I work with clients, I go through like, what's a business school therapy process? Like this kind of stuff really does need to be talked out. Oftentimes when you are too much like just writing into the oblivion and have blinders on, you can go in circles. So I think that's when it's really helpful to bring in a Leland consultant, regardless of it's for an hour or an end-to-end package, but just getting that view of someone who's been through this umpteen times before is helpful.
Yeah. Ben, anything you'd add on this one?
No, great tips. I would add though, do yourself a favor and think about these questions before you have to write the essay, like in your life, like as much as humanly possible. And the reason is, to the best of your ability, it's kind of, you do your best work, you do your most interesting stuff when you're actually doing things that you care about. And it's not to say that every day you get up is going to be easy and fun. But that is to say that like, if you have consistent whys in what you have chosen to do and the decisions you make to pivot in your life, by the time it comes to write the essay, you won't have to think too hard. Like you'll have to do some digging, but you won't have to reinvent yourself in order to make the essay work. And I think admissions committees pick up on that too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one thing that I heard recently is, the admissions committees, they've seen everything, right? There's nothing that you're going to tell them that is like, oh, that's so, I mean, you might, I shouldn't say that, but it's unlikely you come up with something that they've never seen before, but your perspective on that thing can be differentiated, right? And so you may feel like you're just, you're just kind of plain old you. And maybe that's true from a life experience standpoint, but there's certain things that if you convey to them that it matters to you, and it matters to you because of this, this, and this, and that should matter to them because it's going to influence the way that you see and impact the world down the road. I think that's a really helpful way to kind of create something from what feels like a generic candidacy. Okay, so we're almost done with the panel questions, and would love to just have at least maybe 10 minutes of breakout rooms in case people want to, if you guys are open to it, so people just ask you questions directly and maybe kind of cycle through different breakout rooms. We'll keep the rooms open so that you can ask questions. Maybe before we do that though, let's do like a rapid fire final like parting wisdom or advice, tips for everyone as we, as they embark on this journey, and then we'll kind of wrap up with a couple of things and then do breakout rooms. Let's go with Ben. We're going to kick it over to you, and then we'll go Ariel and then Ali.
Final word: a state of the Leland. I think really start early. Don't wait. I'm just going to say it again. I just like, if you continue to like procrastinate this process, it'll show up. And if you start early, it will show up. And the hardest thing as a coach, and frankly, as an applicant who did it the wrong way, who did it the super rushed way, you can actually enjoy this process in a lot of ways. If you start early, it's not going to be the most fun thing filling out online applications per se, but you can really get more joy and satisfaction out of the psychological inventory that you have to take to do this, and the vision you actually craft for yourself. One cool fun fact about my Stanford experience is just like, I wrote about like 10 things in my YGSB essay, and 9 of them happened. That's pretty good. So, and they were all future, and they were all stuff I thought was hypothetical, but that's also the case. So I think getting early and getting working early is a good way to do that.
Great. Ariel, then Ali.
I love that, Ben. I definitely think like the branding piece cannot be underscored enough. But honestly, something we haven't talked about, I guess, because you're all going to be starting early and this is a marathon, don't forget to like take some time to rest and like self-care, connect with your friends. Sometimes I'm working with applicants and they haven't like seen their friends in like several weekends. Like, go do something fun, because I feel like the journey to business school can be really hard. Like, especially if you have to retake the GRE or GMAT more than once, like I did, like it can be really long and really tiring, all of that studying and all of this like self-reflection. And so like, don't forget to have fun, and like connect with your community. That's who's going to like get you not only to business school, but also like through business school. It does not stop then. So like definitely make sure you're connecting with your community and staying grounded in that.
Great. Bring us home, Ali.
That's awesome advice and a derivative of what I was going to say. So I'll change mine. But I think don't forget how awesome you are and how accomplished you are. There's so many times throughout this process where you're going to question yourself. And I think just retaining the knowledge that you belong in one of these classes, it's just a numbers game. And in a part, no matter how hard we work to craft you and work together, it is a little bit of Russian roulette. That said, this whole process can be really fun and exploratory. So if you're thinking about career switching, or if you're thinking about advancing through the ranks at your current institution, this is a phenomenal opportunity to like email random people and see if they have time for a coffee chat and like leverage their experience. And to Ben's point about reading other MBA applications and essays, like a lot of this is pattern recognition and whether or not you could see yourself where someone else is. And to Ariel's point, the community aspect, like this is a fun ride. So if you have other folks in your cohort or world that are applying, get together, commiserate, like share tips about what's working, because once you get to school, it's so cool to see how everyone shows up for each other. And it's good to start now.
That's great. Thank you. Can we show some love to these folks in the chat for taking time out of their evenings? This is great. And as we mentioned, make sure you reach out to them. We'll drop their profiles in the chat, so you can reach out to them directly. You can get the $100 off their comprehensive packages in the next week. Definitely encourage you to do that. Many of these coaches only have a few spots left, and it gets busy. So please take time to do that. You will not regret it. These processes are too competitive and too important to go at them alone. And with that, let's do 10 minutes of breakout rooms. We will end this right at the hour, so sorry for the abruptness. But feel free we'll open up the breakout rooms. Erica will do that, and feel free to hop around and get to know these coaches in a more personal way. Don't be shy. Feel free to come off camera or turn on your camera. These coaches are taking time out of their nights, so thanks for doing this. Give us one.